Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Hillary Olcott. I am the Associate Curator in the Department of the Arts of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. And I've also had the privilege of acting as the coordinating curator for the special exhibition, Frida Kahlo, Appearances Can Be Deceiving, at the De Young Museum. And it's a really fabulous exhibition that's made all the more special because we finished installing it just days before the shelter-in-place order was enacted. And only myself and a few of my colleagues have been able to see it so far. So we're really excited to be able to open our doors. We hope to be able to do so soon and share it with all of you. But in the meantime, I'm really thrilled this evening to be joined by the guest curator of the exhibition and the advising curator, Circe Henestrosa and Gannit Ankori. And tonight they're going to give you a little behind the scenes tour of the exhibition. Before we begin this evening's program though, I would like to take a moment and say thank you to our exhibition sponsors. And I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty at the moment. Let's see. I'm sorry. Well, I would like to say a huge thank you to our exhibition sponsors, and I'll just read them to you. We have John A. and Cynthia Fry-Gunn, Diane B. Wilsey, the Harris family, the Bernard Osher Foundation. Oh, thank you, Lindsay, for sharing your screen for us. I apologize, everyone. There we go. Wonderful. We're back up and running. The Bernard Osher Foundation, the Michael Taylor Trust, Ray and Dagmar Dolby Family Fund, Janet Barnes and Thomas W. Weisel family, Georgia Marie Heckscher, Susie and Fred Harburg in honor of Svi Ankori, Alec and Gail Merriam, and Paul A. Vielich, as well as Aeromexico. And I'd also like to say an enormous thank you to all of our exhibition lenders, with special thanks to the Banco de Mexico, Diego Rivera, and Frida Kahlo Museums Trust. So with that, I will introduce our speakers this evening. Circe Henestrosa is the guest curator of the exhibition. She's joining us today from Singapore, and she is a fashion curator based in Singapore. She curated the exhibition in Mexico, Appearances Can Be Deceiving, the dresses of Frida Kahlo, and co-curated the exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, Frida Kahlo, Making Herself Up. She also co-edited the book by the same title, as well as Frida by Ishiuchi. She's currently the head of fashion at LaSalle College of the Arts in Singapore, and she has presented her research globally, including the United Kingdom, Mexico, China, Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. Gannit Ankori is the advising curator of the exhibition. She is a professor of fine arts and women, gender, and sexuality studies at Brandeis University in Massachusetts. Dr. Ankori is internationally renowned for her groundbreaking research and scholarship on Frida Kahlo. Her numerous books, articles, and catalogs have been published in English, German, French, Italian, Hebrew, Arabic, Japanese, and Chinese. And in addition to being a scholar and an educator, she has curated multiple exhibitions around the world. The latest projects in collaboration with Circe Henestrosa in New York, London, San Francisco, and Austin. And on July 1st, Gannit will be taking on a new role as interim director and chief curator of the Rose Art Museum near Boston. So thank you both of you for joining us. And with that, I will turn it over to Circe and Gannit.
Thank you so much, Hillary. Thank you everyone for coming here today. We're so thrilled to be here. We would like to thank Tom Campbell, director of the De Young Museum, Hilda Trujillo, director of the Museo Frida Kahlo, and special thanks to the director of exhibition, Krista Bruckner, for making this exhibition happen here in San Francisco. Thank you, Hillary, Lindsay, and Carrie for organizing this amazing event for us today. And thank you to all the team here at the De Young for receiving us so well.
Yeah, I share Circe's gratitude, and I'm also thrilled to be here this evening with all of you, and the numbers keep on rising. So many people, Circe. So now we will turn off our cameras and share our presentation with you, which I see is already up. You will continue to hear our voices as we take you through the slides. And after about 45 minutes or so, we will be back with our cameras on and just ready to answer your questions. So here we go. See you at the other end.
So today we want to take you on a personal journey through the life of this important artist and her connection to the wonderful city of San Francisco.
That's right. And as we embark on this journey, Circe, I wonder if we could begin with your personal family connection to this project and to Frida Kahlo. One of my most favorite photographs in this exhibition is this one, Reunion in San Angel. And Circe, can you walk us through it, please?
Yeah, thank you, Gannit. Actually, when I started this research, I was interested in the disability and ethnicity aspects of Kahlo's personal archive and her wardrobe, and how these two related with each other from the beginning of the project. So I started with the ethnicity part. I wanted to know why Kahlo had chosen this specific dress as her logo, and I'll tell you why. Because I have a personal connection to this dress, as I am a wearer of this dress. My family on my father's side comes from the Tehuantepec Isthmus, which is a matriarchal society located in the southeast part of Mexico, where women administrate the society, and all the women dress in this Tehuana attire. So they are called Tehuanas because they come from the Tehuantepec Isthmus. So my great uncles were close friends to Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo back in the 20s and 30s. They were part of the circle of intellectuals. And my aunt Alfa, who was an indigenous woman from Tehuantepec, gave Frida some of her first Tehuana dresses. So there are scholars who say that Alfa and Nereida, my aunties, used to bring Frida these Oaxacan pieces from Tehuantepec. So here in this photo taken by Nicholas Murray back in 1938 in Mexico City, we see this group that includes my aunts. From left, we see Alfa Ríos Henestrosa, Nereida Ríos, Rosa Covarrubias, Diego Rivera, Nicholas Murray, then we see Miguel Covarrubias, and finally Frida Kahlo.
Wow, what a crowd. And it's such an honor to be working with you, Circe, and, you know, an indigenous Mexican fashion curator who knows this material inside out. As we looked at the photograph, Circe and I noticed that Circe's aunt, Nerida, is wearing the very same skirt that Kahlo would wear the following year when she posed for Nicholas Murray in New York, as you can see in this slide. At this point, Circe, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about the great discovery in 2004.
Yeah, so here what we see on this slide is the Blue House, today the Frida Kahlo Museum. And this is the place where Frida Kahlo was born in 1907, lived and died. So here we see Kahlo in her room lying on her bed. And this is a physical space where in April 2004, Kahlo's wardrobe was discovered in the bathroom adjacent to her room. So it was this bathroom that kept the objects of her wardrobe for more than 50 years. So it had been closed first by orders of her husband, Diego Rivera, and later on by Dolores Olmedo, who was a collector and friend of the artist.
Wow. Can you elaborate on what exactly was found in this incredible trove?
Yeah, okay. So yeah, there were 22,000 documents, around 6,000 photographs of the artist, and 300 personal objects of Frida Kahlo. So her wardrobe is mostly composed of traditional Mexican pieces from Oaxaca and beyond. And really there are also some ethnic garments from Guatemala and China, as well as some interesting examples of European and American blouses. So apart from that, we have her jewelry, accessories, orthopedic devices, and shoes and makeup. But Gannit, among her clothes, though, as we were discussing, it was the Tehuana dress that Kahlo chose as her signature look. And this is really shown in her wardrobe because we found nearly 16 Tehuana blouses and around 25 original Tehuana skirts, and some of them sewn and personalized by Kahlo.
Yeah, and we also have her sewing kit in the exhibition. So if we move to the photographs, one of the most, I think, interesting photographs that was found in 2004, actually you chose to open our exhibition. Can you explain what we see here?
Yes, actually, yeah, this is a very important photograph because many scholars said that Kahlo used to wear this dress to please Diego Rivera. And where the wardrobe was open, an image of her maternal family reappeared, which is the image we're seeing now. This image shows Frida's mother fully dressed in the Tehuana tradition, revealing Frida's relationship with this dress long before meeting Rivera. So here we see how Frida circles her mom dressed in this traditional attire and writes, Mama Matilde Calderon, 1890. So by the time she decides to wear this dress, not only she chooses a dress that symbolizes a powerful woman, or a dress that helped her convey her political beliefs or her Mexicanidad, but it was a dress that would take her back to her mother's roots. So yeah, so here let me show a photograph by Bernard Silverstein that shows Frida wearing this specific huipil grande or resplendor. So this starch lace headdress was typically worn by women of the Tehuantepec Isthmus back in the 18th and 19th centuries, and they usually would wear them for festive occasions like weddings, saints' days, and processions. This specific piece could be worn two ways, framing the face or as a cape. So
Circe, can I ask just a question? I understand that you were married in such a resplendor headdress.
yes, exactly. But I wore it more as a cape. And Kahlo usually likes it in the more dramatic style, which is framing her face, as we will see in the other slide.
This is fascinating.
So Gannit, as we were discussing, while Kahlo frequently dressed in the Tehuana dress, there are few examples of her wearing this specific resplendor piece. And she painted herself in the resplendor twice. So here we see an example of the piece that we have in the collection. We have two. And Kahlo's version is made of three kinds of white lace trimmed with either pink ribbon or lilac ribbon. In this slide, we pair, and also in the exhibition, we pair this piece with Kahlo's self-portrait 1948, and where we see her, as we were discussing, framing her face. You will see this painting in the exhibition, which is very exciting. And this painting was dedicated to her dentist, Samuel Faschlecht. So, yeah.
Yeah. As Samuel Faschlecht's daughter told me that he was very, very eager to receive a self-portrait from Kahlo, but he begged her not to make it a sad one because he said he couldn't bear to see her sad. When she brought the finished painting to him, he looked and saw the three pearl-like tears. And then he looked at Kahlo, who apologized and said, "I'm sorry, Doctorcito, I couldn't help myself." So, Circe, can we move to talk about the theme of disability that is so central to the show and also, of course, in Kahlo's life and art?
Yeah. Yes, the disability aspect of the wardrobe, Gannit, is a very, very important part that will inform Kahlo's construction of identity. Kahlo's traces of trauma and the hidden disparity between her right and left leg are evident through all her shoes, as we can see on this slide. So she had polio at the age of 6, and she then suffered an almost fatal accident at the age of 18. So these two events would inform her wardrobe as much as they would inform her art later on. And so as a result of the polio, she was left with a withered and shorter right leg. And this is something that led her to choose long skirts to cover her leg when she was little. And from a very young age, she began wearing 3 to 4 socks on her thinner calf and also wore shoes with build-up heel to mask the asymmetry, also shown in this photograph. So this shows how she established a close relationship between her body and dress from a very, very early age.
Gannit, at the age of 18, when Kahlo was traveling in a bus coming back from school, this bus collided with a tramway, and after this accident, she was confined to her bed for almost a year. So this was the beginning of the career of a great artist, but also the beginning of the deterioration of her body.
Can you explain us a little bit more about this important drawing?
Sure. This pencil drawing, which we're very excited to have on display at the De Young, was created by Kahlo just 1 year after the accident, so a kind of anniversary drawing. And you can notice that the entire composition is dominated by duality. The top half of the drawing is a narrative illustration of the external events of the day. We see the bus and the tram colliding. The ground is strewn with bodies of those who were killed in the accident. But in contrast, and employing very different visual language and different scale, in the foreground we see Kahlo visualizing the personal experience, the psychological experience. We see two Fridas, and this is the first time we see this kind of doubling. One Frida is the bandaged figure lying on a stretcher. The accident injured Kahlo's right leg, arm, spinal column, and perhaps most horrifically, the metal handrail snapped off the bus and penetrated her body, entering through her abdomen and exiting through her vagina. And with a kind of morbid humor, she used to tell people, "I lost my virginity." So above this horizontally, seemingly lifeless body of the wounded Kahlo, she draws a portrait of her head, a thinking self that separates from the injured body. And this is a kind of illumination of a psychological coping mechanism called splitting that is a common response to life-threatening trauma. And just think, she wasn't an artist yet. She was just a 19-year-old trying to come to terms with her experiences. And this duality, division, depiction of multiple selves came to dominate Kahlo's imagery. In the next slide, Circe, we see a painting that she made 20 years later in response to spinal fusion operation in New York. She calls the work "Tree of Hope, Stand Firm." And you notice that here too, we see the injured Kahlo lying down on a hospital gurney, very vulnerable, blood oozing out of the surgical incisions on her back. And next to her, we see the upright Kahlo, erect, dressed and adorned in full Tewana regalia, expressing resilience and hope in the face of medical challenges. And this kind of duality she often expresses in the landscape, and it's echoed here with the division of sun and moon, night and day. So Circe and I also brought comparisons to share with you that these illuminate how Kahlo constructed her paintings, sort of the way she constructed her identity and constructed her look. But in this painting, she integrates an image of her actual corsets, her actual Tewana costumes, and photographs, and she just merges them all into a painting. And also, these are the type of objects that you will see put together in the exhibition as envisioned by Circe.
Yeah, wow. Again, it is always so nice to listen to you talk about Kahlo's art. We always learn so much. Thank you for that very nice explanation. So now we will move on to this photograph of Kahlo. You know, it's very interesting because a lot of people I talked to didn't even realize Frida was severely disabled in different periods of her life, or that she was confined to a wheelchair even. I mean, she spent a lot of time sitting and painted herself sitting, as we just saw in Tree of Hope. Um, so her adoption of this dress was a conscious decision, of course, and both distracting and purposeful. So, but if you see the composition of the dress, it's also a very important part I wanted to point out. So the heavily adorned and fragmented composition of the traditional Tehuana dress would allow Frida to establish a relationship between this specific dress and her own body geometry. So if you see, the stylistic attire draws focus from the torso up. So this dress is composed of three parts: a long skirt, which is called the enagua, a short geometric blouse called the huipil, and lastly, a hairstyle composed of braiding and flowers. So the composition of the Tehuana dress served to keep the viewer's attention focused on the upper part of her body, distracting them from her wounded legs. So almost as if she intentionally wanted to crop herself from the torso up. And we see many paintings where she frames herself this way. And for example, the fact that the huipil is a short tunic, as we can see in this photograph, means that while she is sitting, the huipil doesn't crease. So she looks like a queen, whether she is sitting or whether she's standing. Yeah. So now that you were just mentioning the corsets, in these photos, we see how Kahlo decorated and adorned her corsets. And I think Kahlo transformed these medical corsets into items of great beauty. So Frida's relationship to the corset, of course, is one of support and need. Her body dependent on medical attention. But far from allowing the corset to define her as an invalid, Kahlo decorated and adorned these corsets, making them appear as an explicit choice. She included them in the construction of her looks as an essential piece and almost as a second skin, almost as if she was painting a blouse. And so she would cover them under her beautiful Tehuana dresses, but also uncover them through her art.
That's right. And I wanted to use this specific slide, with your permission, Circe, to address briefly the ethical curatorial position that you articulated and that we all follow. The objects at the De Young Museum are very intimate and personal, but the curatorial decisions actually are very respectful and follow Kahlo's lead. We always show only what Kahlo herself decided to reveal to us. And these plaster corsets show how Kahlo transformed corsets into art. In the next slide, we see how she also painted the corsets and incorporated them in her painting. The next slide of very powerful painting, The Broken Column, also shows what Circe just said, that even in her paintings, she decides to cover up her body from the waist down. Circe, you want to talk a little bit about this incredible painting?
Yeah, I mean, well, here we see a bare-breasted Kahlo and how she depicts herself as injured, but defiant. She wears an orthopedic corset, as you were saying, similar to the ones all of you will be able to see in the exhibition. And Kahlo conceals and reveals constantly through her wardrobe and the art. And these relationships will be also highlighted in the exhibition as Gannit was explaining. So at this point, it's important for me to highlight that disability in this specific show is shown as possibility. And I feel and think that Kahlo used painting to examine experiences of illness, disability, and pain, but also articulated her own resilience and capacity to create meaning and, of course, joy and beauty and art. So that's very, very important to point out that, we're bringing in this exhibition. So now I would like to move on to this beautiful drawing. So before we talk about other aspects of Kahlo's life and her time in San Francisco, I want to share this very intimate drawing with you called Appearances Can Be Deceiving, which is the title of the show in San Francisco. And it's a drawing that also was discovered at the Blue House. This drawing is basically the genesis of this project. In the drawing, we can see Kahlo's layers of identity. She shows us her layers of identity. We see her naked. She presents us with her naked body, wearing her corset. Then we see her spine represented with a crumbling column. We see her with her right leg significantly thinner than the left leg, and the left leg has butterflies. She sometimes uses wings and butterflies as symbols of freedom and health. Then we see very clearly the silhouette of Kahlo's Tehuana's costume as camouflage, covering her body. And then she reiterates to us her visual message in her own words: appearances can be deceiving. So for me, Kahlo's layers of identity are presented here not as nostalgia, but as a personal manifesto. So Gannit, so we can now move on to the next slides. And we just spoke about the relationship between Kahlo and her mother. And we know her relationship with her father was very special. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Sure, Circe. So, Kahlo's very, very close to her father, and she was, by all accounts, his favorite daughter. Wilhelm Kahlo, the father, was of Hungarian-German origins. He immigrated to Mexico at the age of 18 at the end of the 19th century. And in Mexico, as a young man, he changed his name to Guillermo and became a very, very important architectural photographer who documented Mexico's historical and modern sites. Both Kahlo and her friends say that he always remained an outsider. He was immersed in German culture and always spoke Spanish with a very heavy German accent. So we see on the right a self-portrait of Herr Kahlo, as Frida liked to call him in jest. And we see that he displays himself as an artist photographer. Very interestingly, 10 years after his death, Kahlo based a portrait of her father, which we see on the left, on his own self-depiction. In the caption, she emphasizes aspects of his identity that link the two together. He was an artist. He was a sick man who overcame his illness. And both of them had a penchant for explorations of the self. In the next two slides, we see two more self-portraits by Guillermo Kahlo, discovered in 2004. He captures himself nude or as a worker intellectual surrounded by his the German classics. So she learned about self-portraiture. Another lesson she learned from him was how to strike a pose. From a very, very early age and persistently throughout her life, she posed for photographers, she posed for photographs, she composed her image with care and attention to detail. And this is something that you will see throughout the show. Now, Circe and I thought to share with you one of the rarely seen paintings that we actually have in the show that provides insight into Kahlo's understanding of her process of growing up and can sort of sum up what we've just discussed so far. The painting is called Memory. And here we see Kahlo once again divided, this time into 3 personae, and all of them fragmented. So the central Kahlo figure is handless, so helpless, divided between land and sea. She wears a very atypical white skirt and a leather bolero jacket, and her hair, is kind of short and permed, very different from the iconic image for which she's famous. We see that her foot is deformed, alluding to her bout with polio, and a rail penetrates her torso, referencing the accident. What's interesting is that she explicitly shows us how she chooses her fashion, she chooses her garments as a way of choosing an identity. Here she relinquishes the little girl's European school uniform and embraces the adult woman's Tijuana costume. So she illustrates the choice that Circe talked about earlier in our conversation.
So, wow, always so fascinating. So, Gannit, now we will talk a little bit about Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera and their marriage. Kahlo grew up, and then at the age of 22, she married Diego Rivera. He was 43 years old, and he was one of the most famous artists in Mexico and internationally. Shortly after their marriage, they traveled to the United States, or Gringolandia, as she used to call the US, and they lived in San Francisco, New York, and Detroit for the next 3 years. Is that correct?
Yes, 3 years.
So can you tell us a little bit about her time in San Francisco?
Sure. It was very, very influential. The whole trip from 1930 to 33 was extremely important for Kahlo's development as a young woman and as an artist. So Rivera, as you said, was a world famous artist celebrity, and he was invited to paint murals in San Francisco, and Kahlo accompanied him. This was her very first time outside of Mexico, and she was very, very excited and enthusiastic. I was fortunate to be one of the first scholars to have access to letters that she wrote to her family and friends from San Francisco. She wrote several letters each day. And these letters reveal how she responded kind of with childlike glee to the first time she saw the ocean, to the first time she visited Chinatown, the ethnic diversity of San Francisco. She loved everything she saw. And what we find interesting is that she began to develop her own voice, her unique sartorial style, and also she began to paint more seriously. We see that she wrote her mother, and I quote, "The gringas really like me a lot and take notice of all the dresses and rebosos that I brought with me. Their jaws drop at the sight of my jade necklaces, and all the painters want me to pose for them." She actually posed for photographers, not painters, as we see in the next slide, and defined herself as the Tijuana with heavy Aztec beads, long skirts, rebosos, which are the shawls. And I find it really, really interesting that she embraced her Mexican identity and this fashion, specifically when she was far away from her homeland. And she really relished being special and different and in the limelight. And it was a new experience for her. I said before that it was in San Francisco that she painted more seriously, and we have many of the portraits she painted in San Francisco in the exhibition. Here is what was her first serious or a major painting. Circe and I call it the marriage portrait. And it's the first painting where we see her fully dressed in a Tijuana. So this is the first painting of Frida Kahlo, self-image as a Tijuana. And I want you to notice that Diego Rivera is painted as the great artist. The palette and brushes are in his hand. And Kahlo, the painter of this work, contrasts herself and presents herself merely as the little Mexican wife. And she also adopts a kind of pseudo-naive style to this painting.
Yes, absolutely. Look at her wearing this red rebozo and how demure she looks here. So what happened next?
What happened next? Well, Kahlo loved San Francisco and also enjoyed New York, where she made a lot of friends. But when Rivera was commissioned to paint a mural cycle at the Detroit Institute of Art, the couple moved to Detroit in the spring of 1932. Kahlo was absolutely miserable. This was compounded and complicated by the fact that soon after their arrival, she found out that she was pregnant. Her first response was to try to abort the pregnancy, as she had done with two previous pregnancies, but the abortion apparently failed. And her letters reveal that she began to tentatively consider keeping the baby and having the child by cesarean section. And, as she was trying to wrap her head around all of this, on July 4th, 1932, she had a traumatic miscarriage and almost bled to death. So, still in the hospital, she began to paint and draw and make art that was dramatically different from the portraits she had painted just 1 year earlier. And, if you said earlier that the accident at age 18 transformed her into an artist, I think the miscarriage and what happened afterwards made her into the innovative, taboo-breaking artist that we know today. So we have a dramatic shift. We brought to show you a lithograph that Kahlo made in August of 32, so barely a month after she nearly died and had this miscarriage. And this is her first and only known lithograph, which really tackles an unprecedented theme of the experience of a miscarriage. So here she takes off the Tijuana costume and exposes her most intimate experience. Instead of a wife standing by her husband, she stands naked, vulnerable, all alone, a divided self. We see vaginal blood drops, unborn fetuses, really things that are not often seen in art, especially not in 1932. And all these are evidence of her inability to procreate. But while that part of herself failed, the right side of the composition displays the fecundity of nature that is ongoing. And here she used some Aztec sources to compose the plants. And even more importantly, I think, we see that she grows a third arm like a Hindu deity, and in this hand she holds the painter's palette. And if we look at the detail, we see that this is the very same palette that had belonged to Rivera just 1 year earlier. So, unable to give birth to a child, she gives birth to herself and is reborn an artist.
This is so fascinating, and definitely she's someone who has always been ahead of her time. So, no? Wow, Gannit, thank you so much for that amazing explanation. So now we will move on to briefly show you some of the relationships between her wardrobe, her paintings, and photograph that Gannit was mentioning previously. This photo was taken by Nicholas Murray, and we have been talking about Nicholas Murray previously. We saw some of his photographs as well. And he was a Hungarian photographer that immigrated to the US in 1913. He became one of the leading commercial portrait photographers in the US. And he was introduced to Kahlo in 1931 in Mexico by artist Miguel Covarrubias, that we also saw when we saw the photograph of my family. And Nicholas Murray had a relationship, a very close relationship with Kahlo, and a romantic relationship even for nearly 10 years. So he took a series of color carbon prints of Frida Kahlo that revealed the way she used to style her clothes. And he used to say that color calls for a new way of looking at people and looking at things. And this also gave us a lot of information about Kahlo's sartorial choices. So here we see the care she puts to compose her look, from her magenta rebozo to the flowers in her hair, and the use of the lipstick and nail varnish. So this photograph was taken by him in his New York studio after Kahlo returned from Paris, from her show, after showing her work in this group show called Mixi, organized by André Breton in 1939.
Right. And even though they, when Kahlo received this photograph, she and Nick had broken off their intimate relationship. It was her very favorite photograph, and she responded to Nick in a wonderful, wonderful, ecstatic letter. And she wrote to him, "You will always be under the magenta rebozo on the left side, close to my heart." And they remained friends for a long, long time.
So beautiful. So now we move on to this fresco and necklace. While Diego Rivera was painting a series of movable frescoes in New York, his assistant brought Kahlo a prepared fresco panel with paints and brushes, so that Kahlo could experiment a little bit with the fresco painting. So Kahlo composed this portrait of herself wearing a greenstone necklace. But it's interesting because, according to Lucien's blog, Kahlo was quite disgusted. She really didn't like the result of this portrait. She thought it was very ugly. And I think Kahlo even broke the fresco and wanted to throw it in the trash. But blog saved it from the destruction. And we have this amazing piece in the show. And I have to confess, this is the first time I ever see this fresco. And next to it, we see one of Kahlo's bead necklaces. So we don't have record of where she acquired these beads. But they signal Kahlo's ongoing interest in pre-Hispanic art, and her husband, Diego Rivera, was also a collector of these objects. So, we think maybe he helped her acquire them or something. So this necklace appears in many photographs of the artist and also in different paintings. And there are even traces of green paint in some of its stones. So this suggests that she would mix paints to match the green hues for some of her canvases. So when you come to the exhibition, look for this specific necklace so you can see this beautiful detail.
This is fascinating.
The next slide. Here we see an example of these necklaces, gold chain necklaces called torsales. And these torsales are usually made out of gold, and the Tijuana love to wear them. And because these necklaces in Oaxaca, when the Tijuanas wear them, it's a way of displaying the family's wealth. So here we see her wearing them, and again sitting. And Gannit, can you tell us a little bit about this?
Right. We see these torsales in photographs as well. And in this painting, It's Quintly Dog and Me, we see Kahlo posing, as a regal Tijuana and wearing these torsales. I was always struck by her kind of straight back and upright pose, and it was Circe who told me that she probably has a corset underneath that beautiful huipil, which I think we also have that in the show, right, Circe?
Yes, we do.
That's great. So you'll be able to compare the painting with the actual garment. It's Quintly Dog is a hairless native Mexican dog. One of her pets, she had many dogs and spider monkeys and parrots and other birds and even a pet fawn, which roamed around in La Casa Azul, in the Blue House. We have an entire section in the show devoted to the Blue House, which she composed, like she composed her paintings and her dress and her fashion, and she posed for photographs. She also created her home as a kind of microcosmos of Mexico. So while in It's Quintly Dog and Me, we see Kahlo as the iconic Tijuana, in other paintings, she explores alternative identities. Actually, I think she's one of the first artists to teach us that identity is not a static or monolithic given, but that it shifts and changes, and sometimes we have many simultaneous intersectional identities. And she often used clothes and hairdos to perform other identities. And in the slide that you see, she shows herself as a gender fluid persona. In the photograph on the right, taken by her father, the 19-year-old Kahlo wears a man's three-piece suit. She poses with a walking stick like a male dandy. And on the left, we see her self-portrait with cropped hair, where she actively modifies her look. She lops off the Tijuana braids and long hair and puts on another identity by putting on a man's suit. So she explored gender fluidity, and Circe and I always joke that she did so decades before the term even existed. She was so complex, extremely bold, and way ahead of her time. Shall we move to the final painting, Circe?
Sure, yes.
So the final painting we chose to share with you is also on view at the De Young. And here we see Kahlo with one of her pet monkeys. The monkeys, as I said, were her pets, but also like surrogate children, ancient ancestors, alter egos, and the connection we see because she and the monkey wear matching ribbons in their hair. There's so much more to say, but we wanted to end with a quote by Alejandro Gomez Arias, Kahlo's high school sweetheart and lifelong friend. And Circe, I think you should have the last word. So do you mind reading this quote for us?
Okay, I will. Who was Frida Kahlo? It is not possible to find an exact answer. So contradictory and multiple was the personality of this woman that it may be said that many Fridas existed. Perhaps none of them was the one she wanted to be. And with this quote, yes, we would like to finish. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. Thank you so much for that amazing presentation. That was absolutely fabulous. I am excited to be able to go back into the exhibition, and I hope that everyone watching is excited to go see it for the first time. And thank you to everyone watching and to everybody who submitted questions for Circe and Gannit to answer. So the first question we have this evening is actually a two-part question. In your opinion, which of Frida Kahlo's dresses is the most iconic? And how many orthopedic devices are included in the exhibition?
Circe?
Okay, I can answer that. Well, I have to tell you that when I was looking at Kahlo's archive, I met her for the first time. And I met a woman who was incredibly sophisticated, someone who loved perfume, makeup, and that love to dress up and perform through her art and her dress. So in terms of my preferred look continues to be the different hybrid versions of the Tewana attire. And I also like the way she pairs her skirts with her orthopedic corsets, that she does that in her art as well. So the second question, how many orthopedic devices we have in the exhibition, right? Okay, so we have 11 pieces, but I would like to say that I love these specific orthopedic devices and the way she decorates them. In a way, how she demedicalizes them by transforming them into these amazing pieces of art, and also sometimes even into fashionable accessories. These pieces became, in a way, an extension of her body. And so here we have a woman who was, I mean, if you see this, we have a woman who was Mexican, dark-skinned and disabled, but someone who found a way to keep on going on, and who produced art, and who didn't allow her disabilities define her, but who defined who she was in her own terms. And I think the reason why she continues to be very relevant today is because of what she represents. And because she continues to speak to many of us and to different groups. So I think her iconic image remains a very powerful symbol.
Thank you. That's actually a fabulous transition to our next question, which is also a bit of a two-part question. So Kahlo is now a recognized and valued artist, but during her lifetime, her paintings did not get much attention. To what do you attribute this late recognition and the evolving global popularity of her brand and her artwork?
Right. I'll take that one. What a great question. You know, it highlights the enormous gap between Kahlo's marginalized status as an artist during her lifetime and her contemporary international fame, which Circe alluded to. So yes, today she is a global cultural icon, but during her lifetime, she was known mainly as Diego Rivera's flamboyant Mexican wife. And there was much misogynism at that time. It's hard to believe, but she had only 2 solo exhibitions during her lifetime. and could barely sell her work. She never made a living from her art. The first exhibition was in 1938 at the Julian Levy Gallery in New York, just 2-week exhibition. The second was in Mexico City in a gallery in 1953, just 1 year before her untimely death. You know, there's a heartrending interview from that period where she says, "I have done nothing deserving of acknowledgement during my life." And a few years earlier, she writes to Rivera in a letter saying, and this is a direct quote that I can't get out of my mind, "All I've done is fail." So in contrast with that, it brings us to the second part of the question: what makes Kahlo world famous and such an icon today? And, you know, just very concisely, I'd say that with innovative brilliance, her art delves into the human experience deeply and daringly in ways that were considered either eccentric or unseemly during her lifetime. So she explored, she speaks to us and addresses our contemporary concerns and passion. And as Circe said, way ahead of her time. She explored themes related to gender, identity, disability, trauma, the female body and its taboo sexual aspects. So just in conclusion, I would say that in a world that had been dominated by Eurocentric, male, often misogynist perspectives for centuries, Kahlo's unique, prolific visual voice and creativity, voice of a fearless, queer, disabled woman of color, is an alternative, fresh voice that resonates and inspires many, many of us today.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Next question. How did Kahlo's communist-held beliefs impact her choice of clothing and how she sourced her garments for her personal use? That's an excellent question.
Okay. Well, maybe we can both answer this. I'll start by saying that her political beliefs and affiliations with communism are really expressed through all her, to many of her works, many of her diary entries, her corset pieces that all of you will see, and her clothes. There's even an unfinished portrait with Stalin, and where she paints herself wearing her Tijuana dress, and there's another one where she's wearing her corset and skirt called "The Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick," and this was one of her latest paintings. Her dress also conveys that political message, of course, because portraying her Mexicanidad, she aligns herself as one and with the indigenous people of Mexico. So, Gannit, would you like to add a little bit more?
Well, perhaps just to say that Kahlo's communism also finds pointed expression in 1933 painting called "My Dress Hangs There," that is in the De Young exhibition. And we're really excited about it. It was painted in New York during the Great Depression years, and it's a Marxist, very, very forceful critique of US capitalism. And it's interesting, it's related to dress as well, because Kahlo paints an empty Tijuana dress as a stand-in for herself in the center of the composition. And she's like, the dress is like a witness who sharply critiques the vast class disparities, wealth gaps, racism, and other injustices that plagued, perhaps still plague, the US society. So in that painting that you should all take a really good look at, she juxtaposes symbols of the American ideals, like the Statue of Liberty and etc. But she juxtaposes that with a collage of newspaper clippings of bread lines, workers' strikes, impoverished people, often with racial elements as well. And, you know, in her letters from New York, she wrote that she couldn't understand how Americans can live in a country where people are hungry and penniless and homeless and dying on the one hand, while the rich get richer and throw lavish parties on the other. So she was politically active throughout her life. And this manifests itself in, you know, many, many very, very powerful ways.
Thank you. Just one quick last question before we go. I know it's time, but after San Francisco, is the exhibition going to any other state or country?
Yeah, we're going to Holland and then to France. We're going to Paris.
Wonderful. Well, before you go, though, I hope that everybody in the Bay Area has the opportunity to see the show while it's in San Francisco. So thank you, Gannit. Thank you, Circe, for joining us tonight for this digital curatorial conversation. Thank you to all of you out there for joining us as well. And please keep your eye on the DeYoung's website to see when the museum will open and when you'll be able to enjoy the exhibition, Frida Kahlo, Appearances Can Be Deceiving, for yourself. So with that, I'll say good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Hillary. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.